Are you a man, lost and confused in this modern world? Not sure of who you are, where to go, or what to do? An alien stranded in 21st century space without a clear path home, tumbling through darkness without love, friends, or meaningful work? This ain't your daddy's Earth no more. The planet is off its axis, and the men are falling. Repeat, the men are falling. Calling Captain Stone, calling Captain Stone. Today, let's talk about some of the challenges of men, but in particular, modern men. What are some of those challenges?
Well, the old scripts of masculinity have been torn up in many ways, and it really hasn't been replaced with something that's coherent. And so, what's happened with a lot of modern men is that they feel alienated and they're a bit confused as to how to move forward. I know that's quite vague, but that can come across in the realm of work, in family, when it comes to marriage and how to father. So that dynamic can lead a lot of men to not just feel confused, but alienated, as if they are not welcome or they don't fit in the world as it is.
Was it different in like ancient times? How would it have been different back then? You imagine?
I mean, and not even in ancient times. I mean, look to even my own father and or father figures. There was this sense that, okay, I wake up in the morning, I have a job to do as a provider or protect, and then I come home and maybe dinner's made or I play with my kids for a certain amount of time, and then wake up and repeat. It was a little, in many ways, it was a lot more defined than it is today, where I think there's this expectation, and understandably so, that men become more generalists when it comes to, let's say, caregiving and being a working person, paid working person in the world. And so I think that it's changed to the degree that I think it's really destabilizing for a lot of men. And I see that in my clinical practice in different manifestations.
Yeah, it's confusing because one, you're kind of away from your roots, your nature as a man, but also there was sort of a path forward, a clear path for us to go down through a lot of history. But yeah, you're right. It's a bit confusing. Like, whoa, who am I? What am I? What am I supposed to do?
Yeah, I mean, and one of the ways that you can really see that, and this is what, at a personal level, like I'm a dad, and I'm a working dad, and my wife is, a working mom, and we're negotiating how we're going to raise our kids, how we're going to earn for our families, and I think it is different than both of our own models of parenthood. So I see it myself, not just in my clinical practice. Everyone has a different family arrangement, but it's it's a constant challenge, and I think that more is being asked of men to be multidimensional. Like I always think of it as like being emotionally equipped and still maintain the aspects of more traditional masculinity as well in a lot of ways, whatever that looks like.
Yeah, that's actually the most confusing part to me. Is like we're expected to take on these more sort of feminine roles, but at the same time, people expect and want us to be masculine. Like the women are attracted to that, but we get kind of punished for that also. So it's really confusing because, like, well, it seems like biologically and historically, we take on certain roles and we exhibit certain masculine traits, and people still want that, and the women want it at least in us, and we want it in ourselves, and friends want it in us too. It's kind of like it feels good, um, but at the same time, at this point in history, we have to do these sort of more feminine things too. But how do you both? How do you do both? How are you like a? You can even see my question. I'm confused. I'm confused.
And that's okay. But I'm so glad that we're talking about it because I think the only way to resolve that confusion is through finding language for it. And one of the ways that I think about it is more of what you'd call like a functional contextual approach to it. which means that there are moments where being competitive, problem solving, being physical, having emotional control is appropriate and healthy. I mean, if you work with people in certain industries like the military, a lot of working class jobs, like those require you to be confident and assertive and have physical strength. But what happens is that sometimes that gets taken home and shows up in a romantic relationship, which requires more deft hands and more sensitivity. And so the balancing act is very hard. And one of the things that I do in therapy is help develop this functional contextual approach, meaning that, like, what is, the function of, let's say, emotional control? If you work at a bank in a meeting and you're in a meeting there, like, that's very important not to show your cards. But commute home, you go to the kitchen table, and if you're withdrawn or angry, and maybe that works in the office because that's the culture there, it's not going to work at home. And so the context matters a lot. And it's not such an easy thing as to say, oh, this is when can show this type of masculinity, and this is when you can show more of your feminine side. And it's not that easy. It's much more on a case by case basis. And I think the two can be married. The part of men that care a lot, and women care a lot about this too when it comes to romantic attraction, that a man is competitive or a risk taker or has a strong protector mentality to him. But they also are understandably expecting in this modern world that they can show up and express themselves with some degree of being articulate and have some sensitivity as well. And so that's a big part of my practice, is balancing these two seemingly opposable but not aspects of the masculine and the feminine, I guess you'd
Yeah.
call it.
Well, how is it different for women? Women are also kind of having to take on multiple roles. Are the challenges for them similar or different? Yeah. How does this relate to the challenges of women?
You know, there's confusion on the part of women as well, but I think they have, and the feminist movement has been brilliant in terms of giving women economic empowerment. They're no longer dependent economically as much on men. And that was so liberating. And they've made so much progress. And my daughters will be better. They stand on the back of giants. And so I think what I hear from women is more of a sense of overwhelm, anxiety, and stress from trying to manage all of the expectations. There's a little bit more of a path, like, okay, well, I can work and make a living for myself and not be dependent on a man. And sort of the caretaking aspect of it, or domestic labor, much of the time, you can never fully learn it, but it was at least modeled to them through other women in their lives, maybe a mom or someone else. Like, they're more practiced on the emotional sensitivity, right? And empathy. And so marrying that with being, let's say, a provider, they're going to college, they're doing all of the things that you need to do to be professional. So the balance feels a little bit, it's extremely challenging, but I hear that it's much more overwhelming of trying to be an ideal parent and an ideal worker provider. Whereas for men, it's a little bit more bewildering and confusing because this is much newer. We're being put in a position where women have entered the workforce in full, and now there's a lot of sort of like scrambling of how we manage multiple roles.
Yeah, and it sounds like a kind of dangerous thing to say, but when women did enter the workforce, it did take away certain things from men. I mean, that was sort of what a man was. A man was a worker. And then now that we're not competing with women, but we're women are working too, and that changes the way we relate to one another, but also what what's the meaning of our life. So that's another sort of, it's a sort of dangerous path to talk about, but it's, I think men feel this. Men feel, well, you want me to be a man, but you're kind of doing what I do. Would you even need me anymore? But you do need me, but you don't need me. Like, what am I supposed to do?
You captured it nicely. Being needed is a big part of what men seek. This idea of being needed and mattering is a huge part of their mental health. And, I that's the question that I think a lot of men feel, let's say, like, they have their first kid, and the mom is taking charge, and in-laws are in town and there's like this sense of isolation. Like, where am I needed even in this role as dad? Or where am I needed in this economy? If blue collar jobs are getting lost, industrial jobs, and then it's like that's what your father did. And it's like, okay, now what am I going to do? Where am I needed? I think if you give a lot of men a purpose, a place to show up that has meaning and fulfillment, they'll rush to it. They'll go right to it. They'll rush to the fire. That's part of the desire. And I don't know that we're there yet in terms of giving, especially young men, that direction of where to head to and to a place in terms of where they matter, where they can be fulfilled.
It's one of the needs of men is to feel needed. I think well, I'm sure women want to feel that too, but we maybe do so more so. I don't know. What are some of the other sort of needs built into us that may or may not be getting fulfilled these days?
Close to neediness is belongingness. And so I think a lot about male camaraderie and how, especially post pandemic, it's been very hard for many of the men that I work with to find a sense of community and brotherhood. And sometimes they're called like third spaces outside of home and work to gather and connect and talk. A lot of that is getting transferred to the online world, which is just not the same. And so I think there's a lot of desire for it, and you can kind of get it. There's great online communities. There's one way communication in terms of podcasts, but there is less fulfilling mediums for men to connect and build. And it's also harder for men to build friendships. I find that in a lot of cases they do rely on their female partners to sort of do that heavy lifting. And so there's a need for male camaraderie and also sort of a reluctance to do the hard work to go out and find it.
Okay, yeah, I was blaming it on Japan this whole time. I'm what, 38 now. I've been in Japan for the past 12 years, and I was in Korea before that. And I thought It's so hard to make friends here. I cannot make friends in Japan." And certainly I think some cultures it's harder for people to make friends, for men to make friends. But what you're saying is this is a problem in the US too. So that scares me even more. I thought maybe if I go home, I can start to make friends easily. It'll be like a really cool social space. In the meantime, I'm doing this podcast. I can connect with people like you online. But wow, so this is a big widespread problem. That's unfortunate.
It is. Yes, I mean, we're much more fragmented if you think about it, especially post-pandemic. A lot of people dispersed. Like a good example is you're traveling, you're in Japan, and you can keep some semblance of relationships. Like you're talking to people through your podcast. I'm sure there's friends that are over here. It's much more scattered. And men have this way, and I hate to speak in generalities, but just, on the average of kind of like storing away friends for when they need them in some way. It's like, connecting here and there over text, but it's different than being in person. It's different than getting on a call and just reconnecting that way. And so this is much more widespread. And it's been going on for even before the pandemic. There were just few technology, I think, and other people might disagree, has made it easier to connect and in some ways easier to disconnect too, because you can kind of get a sense of that social need, that sense of belonging that I was talking about. But the full thing, I think, does require like being physically close to somebody, or at least being able to hear their voice and have an extended conversation more regularly.
Well, so alienation is a good word that you threw in there earlier. We're socially alienated. We're also alienated from our nature, our being, and a lot of other things. But this social isolation thing, this lack of friends, is a big problem. Yeah, dig in deeper to what you think might be causing that, and is there a way out? How I guess it's all on us. We have to somehow push our way through this culture and find friends, but that's not easy because we also have all these other challenges you've mentioned of we got to caregive and work and everything else.
Yeah, I think a lot about that. And there's sort of the structural approach to this too, that building social, they call it social infrastructure, community meeting places, basketball courts. bowling alleys, and whatever it is that gets people out. Sometimes it's a church, sometimes it's a bar, even though that's not the healthiest thing. And I think if communities were more intentional about creating these spaces in cities and suburbs, I think, and promoting them and advertising them and creating leagues. I think a lot about sports leagues too. Like a lot of that gets lost when you're in adulthood. Let's say you're after high school or college, and you don't have the institution. It's sort of built in for you to meet people in classes or in activities. Is that when you're past that stage and you're in the working world, and let's say you're working remotely and a lot of the case, and you don't necessarily have a strong work culture where you can make close friends. It's like, where do you go to get them? Well, there's hopefully some institution like a church or a league that you can go to sort of build those friendships. So that also requires effort. So there's the constructing of those of the social infrastructure, but there's also the recognition that staying in and ordering in and texting a friend isn't the same thing as making the effort to go out. And I think that a lot of us choose that isolation or solitude because it is easier and you can get the same gratification in some ways in terms of dopamine, right? Like you're playing video games or watching porn or messing around online, like you can get some of that. You can get a sugar high of it. But I think the protein comes from making more of a concerted effort to go out and do that. And then I know it's extremely hard, especially for someone traveling like you.
Yeah, there's nowhere to go to there's nowhere to go. It's almost like, where's the place? And you're lucky now, you're married, you have kids, you're kinda out of the dating game, but for, younger guys, dating, that's also gotten, like, way harder too, because now that these apps have, kind of ruined dating. Now the only way to even there's no space to meet women even really. I guess you could go to the bar or club, but they're not as fun as they used to be because people are on their phones and basically you swipe to meet women, and that's also even further alienating, so now we don't even have a space to meet women either, and that's quite annoying.
It is. And more men are interested in marriage, the data shows, than women are now for the first time. Like so that stereotype is kind of flipped. Men are very much hoping to find someone and settle down, at least if, can look that up afterwards. But that's a change. And so it makes it harder too, because there's a desire and a want for romantic relationships, but also a struggle to find it. I think it's something like in men who are under 30, like 1 out of 3 have not had sex in the last year. And so there's an element of also being touch starved and seeking something, but not being able to find it. It's very demoralizing. So not just friendships, it's romantic relationships too. It's a really tough environment.
Yeah, and you mentioned that now men are more gravitating towards marriage, where maybe in the past they were more running away from it, they didn't feel like they needed it or whatever.
Mhm.
Wh it might just be speculation, but you've thought about this more than I have. What do you think might be leading to that? Why would men wanna get married more now than before?
I think there can often be an emotional dependence on women in ways that we don't recognize as men. And for a lot of men, there's a sense of security and safety and a built-in social life oftentimes. If you're not a social person and let's say your wife does the social planning, but it's the emotional dependent thing that I think can be a problem for men is that they rely on their partners, their female partners, to do a lot of that heavy emotional heavy lifting, like coming home from work and having a bad day, or trying to sort through some sort of emotional problem that they're having. They turn, and they haven't found other outlets or coping mechanisms to do it beyond sort of offloading it on to, let's say, a partner. And so to them, that's one of the things that I speculate could be a part of it.
Yeah, and I guess when you're sort of all alone because you don't got friends or any of that, maybe it's really I don't wanna use the word useful or convenient, but we need somebody. So having a wife or having a girlfriend, it kind of fulfills some of these needs. And also when you're floating off in space, like wandering around and not knowing who you are or where to go or what to do, now you sort of have some sort of home, some sort of space to be, like some structure, the structure of the home and of that relationship. And maybe that provides that's one way to find meaning in your life is okay, well, this little world in my home with my wife and my dog and kids, and now I have some footing.
Yes. Yes, it is grounding, and I think the more that women have had economic independence from men, the more they have rightfully not just settled for marriage, right? There's more opportunities for them to find someone who's a good fit, and it's it's confusing for a lot of men, and I think for young guys out there, it could be really demoralizing.
It's weird. It feels almost like we've flipped, not completely flipped, but we're traditionally women, it seems, got married to kind of get the resources from the man. Of course, also like that you're connected and you love each other and all that. But men were sort of providing the resources in exchange for everything else. But now it's like men are coming into the relationship for their role is not to provide the resources, but that's sort of what it kind of was in the past. Men are coming in more like the way that women were. It seemed of like maybe we don't want their resources, but we want kind of the protection from them. Like they're protecting us weirdly, or they're keeping us safe, or they're providing the emotional support that men. It almost feels like we've become the wife or something, but well, we haven't because we're also the man. So again, the more confusion. But there's something weird, kind of flipping thing going on over there. It seems as well, where it's not so clear what marriage even is.
You said it. And I'm not gonna be the one here to be able to beautifully define it anymore. I think it's becoming a different construct than it was in preceding generations that we were able to see it. And I think there's going to be a pressure, an increasing pressure for men to start to embrace empathy, sensitivity, emotional acumen, right? Because it's so needed when you're in a relationship, and it's not just the job of a woman to be able to provide that. So more, yeah, more is asked of us. Yeah, a lot more, and we're just trying to navigate that. And I'm navigating that alongside my patients in my personal life.
Well, it could be nice if you find the right woman, because basically now it seems like we're both providing a mixture of both things. They're giving us some resources, basically, and all the sort of masculine, traditionally men things, and they're still doing all the womanly stuff too, and I know we shouldn't be dividing things this way, and that's another sort of, problem for men now, where we have to be scared of, like, talking about all this, like, "Oh, they're gonna think I'm a man. They're gonna think I'm a man now." And then, we're also kind of, we're still giving them resources and doing all that kind of stuff and protecting, etcetera, but we're also sort of doing these things that women traditionally did of, emotional support and all that. So, we're kind of both like, now the question is, like, what even is a man? What is a woman? God, it's confusing, but maybe we can't just I wanna be a man, but it's like, can you just be a man? And it's easier to just be a woman, I guess, because it's more culturally acceptable or whatever, but we have to be this weird hybrid, manly woman, like, hybrid thing where do we toggle back and forth? Do we just be a weird mixture, little goopy little thing? I don't know, it's hard. But yeah, it's not even clear what a man or a woman even is anymore.
I mean, different people have different responses to that, but I think if you just think in terms of masculinity and not the categories of man and woman, it can actually be more helpful because you can construct your own masculine code. Masculinity is a construct, meaning that it is something that you can build unique to you. And it's going to include maybe traditionally masculine traits, attributes, ideals, and or traditionally feminine attributes and ideals. And so it's a combination that you can build what works for your life and like sort of embrace your own version of masculinity. And so it fits the modern world. So it fits the context of your life and own it and embrace it. And that's one of the things I try to encourage. Like, yeah, it's much more caregiving now than you would have ever expected to do. It's much more domestic labor than you would have ever expected to do. But this is the world that we live in. It's not that of our fathers and forefathers.
Can you provide us a story or 2 of, some of the people you've worked with?
Yeah. I mean, like a general I can talk sort of in generalities is that, I might be working with a guy, let's say, who has a very high-powered job on Wall Street. And so he was raised with, a father who left for work, came home for work, dinner was on the table, and he was handled roughly as a kid. He had boy, a traditional boyhood, and then sort of gets into the working world, is on Wall Street, and is married to a woman who is equally accomplished in terms of, let's say, her education or her background, but has chosen to stay home with the kids because maybe getting babysitting or nanny is too expensive. And so they're sort of, okay, we're going to have more of a traditional relationship, right? I'll lead on the home front and you can go off to work and do the paid labor that, helps support our family. Maybe in previous generations, something like that is okay. It's just the way that it is. My neighbor's doing it. They're doing it. Everyone else is doing it. But now it's like when we're educated, they have just as much an ability to be on Wall Street themselves a lot of the time. And so some families, let's say in this case, like have an arrangement that at first seems like, okay, this could work for a family. But over the course of time, like it takes something from a woman to give up her ability to work. Right. And so then there's discontent or there's postpartum depression comes in, and then suddenly that traditional family arrangement no longer works because it doesn't fit the opportunity, let's say, that this woman has been given. And then you have a guy who doesn't know how to respond to that, right? Who feels like he's getting shamed for not coming home enough and being with the kids or, being emotionally unavailable. And so that's a situation where you're dealing with psychological variables, but also sociological variables and how the world has changed. That like the sense that I could be out there in the working world but I've made this choice for my family and now I feel alone in it. And so the family arrangements are sort of getting can be very difficult to reconcile at a certain point. And so that's an example of sort of a male breadwinner relationship that seems on the surface like it could work, but maybe it doesn't over the course of time because it takes away a part of each of them doing that when it's too siloed in terms of your roles. Like, I'm the provider and I'm the caregiver. That that siloed type of relationship is much harder now. For many families, it works, and that's great. But that's just one example of something that I might see in my practice.
Women clearly were not happy in the past, it being well, some of them might have been, but, clearly there was this feminine movement, this women's rights movement and feminism and all this, so clearly enough of them weren't happy just being a quote unquote woman, so they wanted to work and they wanted to take on some of these more, masculine roles or whatever, so that's great, we want them to be happy too. We don't wanna turn history back to, like, how it was, like, where women are just, staying home and cleaning and cooking and taking care of the kids, and they can do that, but they want to work. So, how do we both work is the question, I guess. How do we work and they work? Because that seems to be for me, the fundamental, like, thing that shifted. How do we both work? And, like you said, you can choose, like, just the man works or just the woman works, but it seems the common, setup is we both work. It's just kinda nice actually too, because it's kinda good to have a helper, it's not all on you. So in a way, some things have been relieved, there's less pressure to provide because if we lose our job, maybe she can take over for a bit or, we can both help out. But there's a confusion, I guess.
Yeah, and I think part of the discussion is I just want to say that domestic labor is work. It just happens to be unpaid, and so it's some of the most important work that one can do is to parent and do all the necessary things around the house so that it keeps running. It's just that it's devalued because it's unpaid. And paid labor is more valued because it's paid. And so I think in many ways we have to kind of rethink the home front, let's call it, as very valuable labor and work for a man or a woman or anyone. And I think for a lot of men, it's very hard to just convince them, oh, you know, let's say being a stay at home dad is like, that is the most important job you will maybe ever do. I believe that. I could tell someone that, but there's still this sense of like, it's not enough or it's too feminine for me. I don't know what it, or it feels weak or it feels like I'm not living up to my potential or it feels like I'll be judged. And I think for men, just to speak on behalf of all of them, some of them, is that like that's a hard thing to reconcile. That's our job as guys to reimagine work, both the paid and unpaid. But in this case, the unpaid, the domestic labor and the caregiving. It's like, let's own that. If that is the best thing for your family to stay at home or to work part time, like a lot of these, like learn to own that, make it your own. It's not unmasculine. I mean, that is taking control. That is owning something. That is taking control. That is taking a lead. So that's hard to say, and it's much easier to say than it is to feel. And that's one of the things I definitely deal with when I'm working with men in this modern world.
Yeah, but I guess the problem with the work in the home, yeah, it is still work, but it's not seen as much. Like how are other people gonna know that you're doing that work? It's all just hidden away in your home, and also there's no monetary value put on it, so you can't like quantify it as like, okay, this is what my work is worth. Oh, I'm doing a good job because I'm making more money or whatever. So there's no money, so there's no sort of way to quantify how much is this work worth. It's all just in your imagination. And then number two, other people aren't seeing it. You can't like be like, "Hey, look at my house. Look what I did." Like it's all just it's almost like a little dream you had and it's all in your head or some experience that was not documented and you could tell stories about it, but like it's hard for you to convey it or to communicate to other people or for other people to see your work. And so again, you don't it doesn't feel valued because nobody sees it. I mean, your wife sees it and maybe people coming over might kind of, but they're not gonna it's not so clearly defined in terms of value because there's no money and it's sort of invisible behind the walls of your house.
Yeah, that's why sometimes it's called invisible labor. You know, the planning and organizing that's required of running a household and raising kids is immense. And you're right, a lot of the times it isn't seen. I think though it's seen in the kids that let's say you raise or the way that your home looks and hopefully it's recognized by your partner and other family members that you're doing that. But that is a challenge and there's a devaluing of home labor and maybe an overvaluing of paid labor in our society right now, and that kind of has to change. And you can think about it with like things like like family leave. You know that companies are showing that they care about the value of domestic labor when they offer healthy, generous leave policies for dads and for moms, right? And this is only recent for with paternity leave that a lot of states are offering mandated paternity leave policies for companies. So you're right. But I will also make the argument that much of what goes on at work in paid labor is also invisible too. All right. I don't go home and tell anyone in my family exactly what's going on during my job. And so yes, there's a loneliness to the work that we all do, whether it's paid or unpaid.
Yeah, but we do want to be seen and valued. So if we can get it from one side or the other or both, that would be great. It might just be kind of a perspective shift too. There's one way to like live life and be like, okay, I want to compete with the world and I want to be seen by the world. And so this is sort of you're trying to raise your status and raise your money, and it's big game. But alternatively, you could just be like, oh, well, I don't want to say make your world smaller, but physically it is. You can start to focus on the space around you, like your community, or even smaller, your house, your family, your kids, and your wife, and be like, I don't need money to prove that I made the lives of my children better and made this place better for my wife and everybody here with me and everyone I love. It's very clear and it is seen. Your children see it, your wife sees it, your friends who come over see it. Then it becomes easier when your goal is just to make this little world in your house and, maybe a little bit larger, better than when you're trying to be seen and, win the game of life with the whole world of, money and status and stuff. So, I mean, it might just be a perspective shift of, okay, let's start caring about something else.
You're right. I might phrase it this way: is like in the world of psychology, we sometimes call it like values, which is the quality that you want to live on this world. And when you think about values, you don't have to think as much about money, right? I want to be a loving, present person to my child, or I want to show up to work and creatively tackle problems. If you think in terms of those terms, it can kind of pull you away from the shiny lights of money. That, like, sitting down and playing with your child is extremely gratifying at times in a way that isn't seen, that can't be quantified, that is unpaid. And I think those moments, the everyday moments, are the things that make up life. And if you sort of access your sense of love and awe in any given moment and curiosity, that's a life worth living. And I think that the values that underline what you do, if you're in touch with them, they can be very helpful in terms of moving yourself away from the money treadmill.
Yeah, and the ultimate currency really is, I mean, from my perspective, these brain chemicals, dopamine and serotonin and all that. I mean, that's sort of money, sort of a route into feeling happy, feeling calm, feeling connected, feeling like you're reaching your goals. So I guess you can just, as long as you have a goal and a path forward, whether that's chasing money or chasing this or that, or just, taking care of your family or whatever it is. I think we just need it. We need a goal, and then we're kind of just moving ourselves down that goal, and then that seems to be enough. That seems to be enough. Well, of course, we need social connection and other things in life too, but that having a goal, having a little purpose, and then just sort of moving your way down that, whether that's cleaning your house or doing something at work, or for me, it's like this podcast. I don't get paid for this. Actually, I think it's a net loss. I pay money for this, at this point, and then but this is the meaning of my life, and that's fine. That's fine, and I feel happy. I mean, you have to make money, but you can find something in life that it might not be paid, but that's your path.
Yeah, it's gratifying and fulfilling to you. Like, why? What is, if you don't mind me turning the tables for a minute, like, what is gratifying and fulfilling for you in terms of running this podcast?
I think it's a few things. One is I love exploring these ideas. I think there's a sort of a philosopher just sort of just in me. That's sort of what I am. I studied philosophy, and I miss these chats with my friends and the professors and stuff. Most of my friends were professors. I would just hang out with my professors a lot of the time and kind of talk. I don't know why. I like trying to figure out what is going on in this world, and what we are, and all of this. And then two, yeah, there's that social isolation. I want to feel connected with others, and maybe valued too. I wasn't popular as a kid, and so um, I didn't feel popular. I didn't feel like I had friends. So now maybe this is a way to like feel accepted by others. And when you feel accepted by others you admire, smart people like you, maybe that feels good. So you kind of boost your self-esteem a little bit by being able to, keep up with it and have a good conversation with these smart people that you admire. That you read their book and you like their book, or you listen to them on a podcast. You're like, that's a cool person. And then when you can hang out with this person, it feels good. It feels nice to be able to hang out with these people, and not just hang out, but like you feel like a little bit valued. You're never fully sure if they liked you or not, but and I shouldn't chase that, but I think it's human nature to be, to want to feel accepted and connected. Um, and then three, it's like and then three, I think I need to do something, because if it's not this, then what? Then what do I do? I guess like in the past, in my 20s, I was like chasing women and stuff, or could be traveling, trying to travel all these different places. But you need something, and if without this, I have to find something else. So, but this is a good one. But yeah, it could get replaced by something else. Maybe I fall in love and I get married and have kids, and maybe this becomes a little bit less important, or I build some big technology company, and this company is my meaning. You could write a book temporarily, and that be temporarily that is sort of what it is, and you find some new great job. Maybe you do find that community, or you find that I travel a lot. Maybe I find some place that I really fit in, and I'm just so happy living life. Like right now, I'm traveling in Vietnam. I'm in Vietnam and Cambodia for like 6 weeks, and I feel less desired to do this podcast. Actually, I'm like, I don't need this as much, because the people here are friendly. It's lots of amazing experiences. I'm almost like, what am I doing in my, this microphone, in this computer? Because out there is way more beautiful, and there's great people and great nature and all that. And like, maybe I should do this podcast a little bit less. But I do love this. And when I'm in Japan, it's really, really helpful to have this because there my life is so, I don't know. I don't want to say meaningless, but this gives me the most.
Yeah, so maybe the podcast serves more of a purpose for you in Japan. But one of the things that is can be really powerful is to journal and to start to write down what you just beautifully captured there in terms of what your values are, like why you're doing the thing that you're doing. And like you never attain values. Values are like directions. A psychologist named Steve Hayes described it as like you never reach east or west, but you're going to be traveling in that direction. And so, what you were talking about there in terms of adventure and philosophy and curiosity and your childhood that felt like maybe you were socially awkward, if I got that right, and that this is a way to connect. Like all those things are so powerful, and I would encourage you to write them down and even like articulate them. And like, because when you know what you stand for, like ego goes away, sort of maybe the desire to be, to care only about money or some of these what can be distractions fall away and you can kind of focus on what centers you and what you really care about. And there's nothing like that because when you're really centered and you know what you stand for, you know, being masculine or being strong or any of these things that we were talking about earlier kind of fade away and a confidence builds because you're like, oh, I'm a philosophical person. I like to tackle hard problems. I want to problem solve. I want to figure things out that are impossible to figure out, right? Like once you know that, then you're in the right space. And then it's like, you have to make a living, but at a certain point, like you know yourself and what you stand for.
Yeah, this could be a really useful exercise for a lot of people because even if your focus, your meaning in life is something as seemingly trivial as I don't know, watching porn or getting drunk and partying or playing on some social media platform or whatever, or it's something else like you're playing basketball or baseball or video games or maybe you have a job that you focus on. You can sit down and journal and do kind of what I just did and be like, what why do you do this? What do you like about this? What do you love about porn? What do you love about Reddit? And then it might seem like a stupid thing that you're obsessed with, but then once you sort of write it down, you're like, oh, this is what I want. This is what I care about, and this is what this gives me. Okay, cool. And you do feel a bit more free and clear. The path seems more clear at that point.
Yeah. And it relates a bit to what we were talking about before when it comes to like working with men in therapy is like taking a functional approach means that okay, you're doing these things that the outside world might see as negative or terrible, or you might know as harmful. But there's a reason why you keep doing it. There's a reason why you keep drinking. There's a reason why you keep getting angry in relationships, right? It offers you something. And I think once you can start to articulate the why the behavior keeps persisting, what is it giving you? Even when you work with addiction, like there is something that works in whatever substance of choice someone has. That's not condoning it. That's figuring out, okay, we know why, but it's actually a solution to a deeper problem, right? So I guess what we're talking about here is that once you identify, and sometimes writing can be very helpful in that. And that's one of the other things I always encourage putting thoughts to paper, especially for guys who wouldn't typically do that.
Do you have any other exercises for men who feel confused and they don't have a path, or they have a path, but they're not really sure they're not really sure if it's in, or they're judging their path, saying this is a bad path. I need to change my path. Of course, with addiction, it seems like you would feel that naturally. Like, I should stop drinking. I should stop looking at porn or whatever. This is not the life I want. But also, it might just be like you don't even know who you are and you don't know where to go. But you're alive and you are doing something. Like I said, I'm making this podcast. Some people are playing basketball or something. Yeah. Well, any other sort of exercises or practical steps out of this little land of confusion?
I've talked about writing and just starting unstructured and seeing where the themes are and where that goes. Developing language can be very helpful, and part of that means reading and writing. But when it comes to like finding your purpose, you know, there's a tyranny to waiting to find your purpose, as if it's going to fall on your lap. And I think one of the things that I see is that sort of an unwillingness to just go out and experiment. Like sometimes checking things off as not working for you is more helpful than waiting to find the thing, searching online or reading, right? So, meaning join something, join a league, join a book club, take a chance with something. Every small day, take some small chance, talk to somebody on the train, right? You end up gaining some confidence and learning something about someone else. Like I think there's an action that can be very helpful for a lot of guys. It's like, okay, what's something you sort of care about? Um, Gardening. Okay, well, go, go to a store and ask about plants, or figure out if there's opportunities to volunteer. I think one of the biggest things that I would suggest for those guys out there who are searching but have goodness in their heart is to mentor a younger kid. We need male mentors. So join the Boys and Girls of America and find someone, a kid who really needs it to help with homework. You know, doing that for me was one of the most powerful things and helped me actually find psychology during a period of my life where I was also searching. Um, so that's another practical thing is like at a certain point, you got to be done thinking, right? Thinking, and I wrote this book about overthinking, is that overthinking is thinking that's outlived its usefulness to you and overstayed its welcome. And at a certain point, you just got to say, okay, I'm going to go off and do the thing and record the podcast with Michael, or I'm going to just send an email out to this Boys and Girls of America and see if there's any opportunity to mentor. You cannot want to do something and still get up and do it.
Is that the main message from your book? Quiet your mind, a book for men to, kind of get out of overthinking. We didn't talk too much about overthinking yet, but it sounds like it's sort of this, just do it, just take some action, but, that's sort of the problem is, like, you can't take the action because 'cause you're overthinking, so I know we're in this conversation now, but, maybe you can dig into more about, some of the lessons from your book.
Yeah. So that advice was more theoretical about like how you find your path. So that was a question you asked me. With overthinking can definitely keep you from that. So overthinking is a process. I'll just define it quickly of rumination and worry. Worry is about the uncertain future, right? You're sort of modeling out scenarios and trying to prevent yourself from some harm or danger. Rumination is more past focus and you're sort of digging for insight. It's very self-critical and why am I so depressed? And academics call it repetitive negative thinking. It's another word for overthinking. It's a combination of worry and rumination. Both of those processes are unwanted, unrelenting, unproductive, right? And so you can sort of get into one of these loops where it's almost like you're just kneading dough. So that's one analogy of it over and over and over again. It's like strenuous and it's unhelpful to you, and it's so hard to stop, and it's negative. And so one of the parts of my book is that the message is, well, there's 24 different tools that I provide for overcoming overthinking, and it's geared towards men, though anyone can read it and hopefully gain some insights and tools from it. But the idea is that overthinking is vague and critical. And so a lot of the tools in the book help you get centered and grounded and concretize your thinking. So you're like, okay, I'm overthinking because of this. Here's something that I can do about it. I could, I talk about creating calm. So there's a mindfulness technique. There's getting more granular with your emotions and being able to name them, because when you name, you can tame. There's stress management tools that I put in there. One of them is like transforming. You're using what's called cognitive reappraisal, which is going from more of a threat mindset to a challenge mindset. I mean, I'm running through these tools very quickly. I would want to take more time with them. And then there's like taking perspective as well on your thinking that I talk about. And I use one of the tools called like being your own elite coach, sort of like talking to yourself in a way as you would to a friend or someone you really care about, like training yourself to be less self-loathing, less self-berating, and sort of transforming into a coach who sort of talks to a promising athlete. It's one of the other tools I have in the book. So these are practical tools that you can use. We didn't get a chance to go too much into it today, but the book is more for in the moment. I'm kind of going through an episode of overthinking. Here are some of the things that you can do, some concrete tools to tap into. So I just gave you a very, very brief overview of some of them.
Yeah, and I also, kind of threw out that question from, 50 minutes into the conversation is it sounds like a different topic, but it is a root of a lot of the problems for us not finding our path. There's multiple things, there's structural, this is the world is not, built maybe for men, like you said, there's no spaces for us, and culture has shifted and technology, etcetera. But, it's also like this overthinking of like, "What is my purpose? What am I gonna do? Where do I go?" And it sounds like what you're saying too is maybe don't overthink it. Just somehow get into sort of this more positive, less threat oriented position, and just do something. Just do something, even if it's not perfect. Don't wait for the sort of the perfect big goal, or the right time or whatever. Just do something, even if it's only 20% of what you want it to be, or 80% or whatever. It's as good as it can get. It kind of reminds me of these conversations I had with this author Loretta Bruning, and we talked about life purpose, and she says this idea of like finding the purpose, like the meaning of my life is sort of a failed exercise. I mean, you could do that. You could find the big thing, but instead just find, okay, what do I want to do today? What about how about this week? And I can always change my purpose. So let's just find something for now and move towards that, and not have to overthink and find the big purpose with a P or whatever. Instead, just find something that's like, oh, this is what I like right now. Like, like you said, you're sitting on the train and you just talk to this person, or maybe today you want to try making a podcast. Maybe you've never made a podcast and say, okay, well, I don't need to make a podcast. I'm just gonna do one today and see how I feel. And if I like it, I can keep doing it. If I don't, I don't. So that's kind of reminds me of that too.
Yeah, it is. And, so there's sort of breaking the cycle of overthinking with movement too. So it's not even necessarily like going and volunteering somewhere. It can also just be exercise and moving your body and coming back to the problem that you're trying to solve or the decision that you're trying to make. I will add one more thing in there is that it's very good to know what overthinking is. And, I explained it earlier. And sometimes even just talking to yourself and saying, you know what, I'm going through one of those overthinking modes, labeling it, giving it a name does in it of itself help slow it down because in the moment you think you're doing this, I'm like, if I just problem solve a little bit more, I'll finally figure out the problem. Or if I sort of wait and figure out, what decision to make, and if I just spend a couple more minutes or another hour or whatever it is, like I'll finally come to the right decision. And that is kind of a myth because more thinking, oftentimes in a lot of situations with overthinking, doesn't do the trick. So knowing what it is and being able to call it out to yourself and then normalize it, like we all, mostly all of us, I think. I think it's something. There's one book said it was like 99.5% of us overthink at some point in our life, or and if you could just normalize that to yourself, okay, I'm doing this thing. Even that's an intervention that can be helpful.
Yeah, and it's like action, just taking action might solve a lot of these problems. We're talking in the beginning of this part of this conversation about, the challenges of men, and the all of the problems that we're experiencing. If you just start moving and doing things, even we stop worrying about all that. Even that sort of fades away. You're like, what, the problems of man? I'm busy living my life. I'm in a story, and when you feel like you're moving forward in a story with action after action after action, then you're like, "What? That's not a problem for me." Like, when I'm walking around and I'm going down these boats and walking through these mountains or whatever in Vietnam, I'm like, "I don't feel these problems of man. I'm good." Or if I'm, like, you could be doing anything. You could just be just moving. Just I interviewed this other guy, Carl Collar, and he was saying the same thing. I asked him about how to write narrative fiction, or how to make a story or whatever. He's just like, "Action, action, action. Stop thinking and start acting." And so as long as you're doing something, you kind of like even the whole this whole bigger problem of the problem of men kind of for you fades away in the moment because you're in the middle of a story, moving forward somewhere.
You're right, and one of the things I talk about in the book is, like, finding awe, which is just an emotion of wonder. You can find it in many different places, and I'm sure you've experienced it quite a bit traveling as much as you have that, like, stopping to marvel at architecture or a skyline or a cityscape or marvel at an idea or, just almost seeking it out and slowing things down and grounding in your 5 senses wherever you are can help you get out of your head and then, into the world. And if you're on the hunt for awe experiences, you can find them. It's not just seeing the Swiss Alps that can get you to awe. It's like it's everywhere. But if you just sort of slow down and give yourself the opportunity to even walk slower. And I talk about in the book also like listening to classical music and walking outside and just observing the everyday sights and sounds that sights that you would see, but from a different angle, from a different perspective. That's also a good way to get out of your head.
Yeah, just feeling connected and feeling alive. And you could do that through your senses or, through a relationship or through some kind of work or whatever. But, yeah, we just don't wanna feel alienated and disconnected and stuff, and if we can get out of our head and into the world or into other people, it's sort of like, "Oh, well, maybe that's all I wanted. I just didn't wanna be alone."
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, sometimes it's that simple.
Oh, hey, actually, so final question. You mentioned earlier about how you were sort of facing some problems earlier in your life, and psychology and mentoring people helped you. If you can maybe tell that a little story about that, that'd be kind of nice.
Well, in college, I was studying English and was looking to find a job, and I went to journalism school and worked in journalism, and if you'll recall, in 2008, there was a financial crash, and journalism was completely turned on its head. There were blogs, there was social media getting created, and so print journalism, old school journalism was changing, and there weren't as many job opportunities. Fortunately, I was working at Psychology Today at that time as an editorial intern, and I got a chance to interview a lot of psychologists just doing interviews, kind of like you're doing now, actually, but working for as an intern, and it really got me excited about the possibility of studying that more formally. And problem is that you can't just jump into being a psychologist. You got to go to school. So I took some time off and I worked like media jobs and was kind of wayward. Wasn't really sure exactly how I was going to get into psychology. Didn't quite have a plan. And I was like, you know what? I have no clinical or research experience. And so the first thing I did was I started volunteering as a mentor for a kid who was probably, I think at the time, like 6 or 7. He was such a wonderful person. And it got me in touch with you know, boyhood and I thought about fatherhood in the future for myself. And it just gave me a sense of purpose and direction and gave me confidence that I could help others. And I was always very interested in stories. I was in New York City and riding the subway, and I was like, I wonder what that person's thinking. I wonder what that person's doing. Like, how do they feel? I wanted to know more. And, like I said, I started doing this mentoring thing, and it eventually led me to being a psychologist. I had to go back to school and all that. But so it was just one small thing, but it helps inspire me.
Yeah, but just start with one small thing today, and then another one after that. Just keep doing something, and I guess we'll find ourselves, and we'll find a path, and maybe we don't, and maybe that's okay too. But we just do something and do what we can. Um, thank you so much, Jet. If people want to connect with you or learn more, where can they go?
So they could reach me through my website. It's jetstonephd.com. There's a way to reach me through there. And then I also have social media. I have an Instagram account called Flex, dot flexibility. That's my Instagram. You could probably search my name and find it. Those are the 2 ways. I have a blog at Psychology Today also. So if you go to psychologytoday.com and you search my name, you can see some of my articles and my blog there. And I think you can reach out through me through there as well.
All right. Well, thank you so much for today. Actually, this is my first podcast I'm doing during my travels, and for a minute I was like, oh, why did I schedule these things for during my travel? But actually, it's kind of nice a little hybrid where I'm not just out there having fun and whatever. I'm also, in touch with like my current deeper purpose of this. Maybe it'll make, that world out there even more beautiful and make me feel even better that I had this conversation with you today, balancing all of my needs and not losing myself, not losing my path. I want to find new paths, but I want to keep this path, and that's also, another struggle, another conversation. But yeah, thank you, thanks again, Jet. I really appreciate it.
It was a real pleasure for me, and I wish you the best on all your travels.